Welcome to Paulogia and another edition of Ham and Egg News, where we react to Ken Ham reacting to things. Let me just look at the show notes here. Are they doing stories about worms?
A worm species that supposedly lost 7,000 genes after evolving to fertilize itself. This organism is Caenorhabditis, which is a type of roundworm. It's a nematode. They're very small. They're only like a millimeter in length. They're transparent.
Hello? Did someone say transgender?
No. She said transparent.
Hi, Paulogia. Thank you for having me.
She also said nematode. Is Kermit back there?
I'm anti-ordinary. I make videos here on YouTube. I'm essentially the transgender Jesus,
Transgender Jesus?
and that's why I'm here to talk today. If you don't believe me, then that is just blasphemy.
Okay, so you'd like me to start from the top then?
I'm here.
All right.
So Ken is not with us today, so he's got some medical appointments that he's dealing with.
Oh no. How will we survive without Ken?
So we have Avery Foley back again. She was on a couple weeks ago, and now the women
Outnumber
have the majority
What's up with
for the
that?
first time.
Maybe that's a good sign. Women are actually leading something in a Christian discussion.
On this particular event, I decided I would bring some women distractants. So if I'm getting ganged up on here, I've got chocolates over here. That usually works pretty well.
Sadly, that will work
It probably
effectively.
will.
It will.
Well, they were progressive for 20 seconds until the three of them brought it all back to stereotypes.
So the first article up is largest group of Mennonite churches leaves denomination.
Oh, interesting. I was actually raised in the Mennonite church denomination, and I'm a fifth-generation ethnic Mennonite, or something like that. If you're not familiar with Mennonites, it was a Christian denomination named after its founder, Menno Simons. Groups like the Hutterites and the Amish, as seen in the 1985 Harrison Ford movie Witness, are closely related offshoots of the Mennonites.
We're all crazy Mennonites living in an Amish paradise.
The major defining factor at the time was an Anabaptist tradition, proclaiming that only believers by choice could and should be baptized, breaking with the Catholic tradition of baptizing infants. The other defining doctrine was strict pacifism. They took the doctrine of turn the other cheek highly literally.
I really don't care, in fact I wish him well, 'cause I'll be laughing my head off when he's burning in hell.
During the World Wars, my ancestors were conscientious objectors.
There's been, obviously, just like in many church denominations today, a lot of disagreement over the issue of sexuality and LGBT type issues.
Over the discussion regarding LGBT issues, and then someone kind of giggles in the background as if, oh God, those pesky gays. They're not real issues. The real issues is why our religious rights are being infringed upon.
And they're leaving because there are people within that larger denomination, that larger umbrella organization, that are open to homosexual marriage and things like that.
This larger organization they talk about is called the Mennonite Church USA. But for 140 years prior to 2002, it was called the General Conference Mennonite Church. And I was a part of it. Even went to their national convention a few times. As long as I can remember, there's been a struggle between the umbrella conference and the individual, more conservative fundamentalist congregations like the one I grew up in. I specifically refused to enroll in the conference Bible college because I found out, perhaps somewhat ironically now, that they taught that some of the Bible passages might be allegorical rather than strictly literal. I often expressed contempt over the GC's heretical views.
I'm the pious guy the little omelets wanna be like, on my knees day and night scoring points for the afterlife.
And this particular group said, no, we're going to stick with what God has to say in his word, and we're backing off from you then.
Yeah.
And you know what? We want to encourage that.
Not too long after I moved away from my hometown, my childhood church made the same split that this block of churches are doing, leaving the organizing denomination over the LGBTQ stance, among a number of other biblical interpretation disagreements. Lest it not be clear, Answers in Genesis view the churches leaving as the heroes here. Another victory in their war against other Christians.
Think you're really righteous? Think you're pure in heart? Well, I know I'm a million times as humble as thou art.
We want people to stand on the authority of the Bible from the first verse. That doesn't mean, oh, you know what, we're going to follow a lot of the Bible, but you know when it comes to these, we're just going to throw those out and go with the world.
Yeah, but I find it convenient, like the Christian churches or churches in general only like to hold and stick true to their beliefs when it agrees with their worldview. There are things in the Bible that directly tell you to accept gay people, but because there are things in the Bible that contradict that statement, you would prefer to stick by the one that validates your current opinion. It's called confirmation bias, and it's a beautiful thing for the religious.
We tend to think of Mennonites as a more conservative denomination, and even they're struggling.
Mennonite, like Jewish, can refer to a religious denomination in one context and to an ethnicity in others. The modern Mennonite church is relatively multicultural and for decades has been progressively liberal in its views. That said, the Swiss-descendant, Low German-speaking, Vereinigte Rollkuchen, Pluma mouse-eating, isolationist pacifist communities are still very far on the conservative fundamentalist end of the spectrum.
I'm a man of the land, I'm into discipline. Got a Bible in my hand and a beard on my chin.
Thus, the widening schism and gap in meaning of the label.
Yeah, I mean, you see this type of infiltration, and that's the right word for it. People are infiltrating the church.
You see this kind of infiltration, we've all got our ninja outfits on, and soon you're all going to be parading around on rainbow unicorns.
Teaching some of these false doctrines. The Bible says there's going to be false teachers that are going to introduce destructive heresies. This is exactly what we're seeing. I mean, the Bible is very clear, 1 Corinthians 6:9, 1 Timothy 1:10.
Is it further irony that Bodie picks 1 Timothy to argue against introducing destructive heresies, when it is widely accepted that 1 Timothy wasn't written by Paul, but is a later forgery designed to silence women? More on that later in 2018.
When it comes to homosexual behavior, I mean, this is a sin. The Bible is clear about that.
Oh yeah, we're going to go down this route, the fact that being gay is a sin. The Bible declares many, many, many natural acts as sins and damns people to hell. And that would include most followers of the religion. Most followers of the religion eat meat, they eat pork, I'm talking about like Christianity. I know you don't adhere to the Old Testament, but I've always found that quite complexing because it's like you believe the Bible is the word of the Lord. So how can you just disregard one section of the word, if that makes sense?
And, when sexual immorality starts to just explode within churches, what are you going to do? You got to go back to the Word of God.
Yeah.
I always found it weird that you can conflate sexual immorality to being a homosexual. Homosexuality just requires two consenting adults of the same sex to have sex together. I would consider sexual immorality as rape, pedophilia, sexual abuse, etc. But with the arrests of Catholic paedophile priests, wouldn't you say sexual immorality is already abundant in the church?
But if I finish all of my chores and you finish thine, then tonight we're gonna party like it's 1699.
Looks like we have several Canadians on here.
I see that.
So Avery is from Canada.
I am.
Hey, I'm from Canada. Canada? Mennonites? This show is all about me.
No, it's all about me.
Right.
Playboy might kill magazine to focus on World of Playboy. All right, so for a few
Sounds
years,
like good news.
No.
There's no time for sin and vice, living in an Amish paradise.
So I'm like, well, let me check some of this stuff, and this is the mistake. You don't type in porn statistics. As soon as you put the word in the
Oh, dear.
type engine, I'm like, oh, you got to be
Never know
kidding
what's
me.
going to come up.
So, yeah.
Just for fun, I thought I'd go against Bodie's advice here and do a search on porn statistics. Here's the top 7 results. The first is a Christian-based software package for blocking porn. 4 of the top 7 hits were Christian ministries, and there isn't a single picture of any women in any of the top 10 hits. This is just a message to Answers in Genesis HR department. Whatever you found on Bodie's computer, that was not something he stumbled across researching this segment.
You got to be careful.
Yeah,
You've got to make sure your kids aren't, accidentally stumbling upon this kind of stuff.
Or coworkers.
Okay, this next article. I shake my head.
Well, that's kind of the point of clickbait titles, to get an instant reaction from you.
Okay, the transgender family where the father gave birth.
Well, you started off the statement with the transgender family. So given the current information, I don't think it would be that hard to deduce what was going on.
Let me just put this
It's gonna
down in a
simplify
bare
this,
basic
make it really easy.
terminologies. A man gets a woman pregnant and she gives birth.
The guy says it as if it's some kind of jab, I guess, at these people, but he literally just said factual statements. I'm not sure if they're typically considered offensive, but I don't typically consider explaining how a biological function came to be as offensive. Plus, it's kind of common sense, like, how the fuck are they supposed to have a kid if they didn't do it that way? We all know the birds and the bees now.
You wouldn't think that's a big deal, but of course it's now a big deal because people don't identify as what they think they are.
I would argue that it still isn't a big deal. it just is a novelty to some extent because people are not used to hearing these situations. It happened a few years ago as well, and it was crazy in the news then as well. People just like coming across things that they wouldn't usually come across, and trans people are one of those things. Trans fucking pregnant people are like the unicorn gold mine of those things.
I'm going to identify as the identifier, so that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to identify who these different people are.
Oh, lucky for us, we have the transologist here. He's going to define the characteristics of the trans species. You all better pay attention now. I'm sure this guy has more information than you could ever gain Google.
The names of them are Diane and Fernando. Now, Diane was actually born a male, but identifies as a female. Fernando was born as a female and identifies as a male.
Correct.
Yes.
Okay.
This might be a really nitpicky thing to say because it is just general speak, but when you're speaking to an audience or to a group of people online, I like to think that we should define the differences between these things. Some trans people do make the statement that they identify as male or female, but you cannot identify as a sex. You are a sex. Transgender people or transsexual people have a gender expression that does not correlate with their sex. So, yeah, they are identifying as different gender expressions to how they were born, but they're not identifying as a different sex, so to speak, because they can't. A sex is a physical, non-changing characteristic.
If Diane, who was originally born as the guy, identifies as a woman, then why were they performing the male duties? Did you ever stop thinking about that?
Well, do you ever stop to think why heterosexual guys like to be stood on with stiletto high heels and fucked with dildos? Probably not, because we don't like to think about things we don't find attractive. I don't know what was going through these people's mind, but what they want to do with their sex life is completely up to them, and they've been born in a situation that's different to yourself. So, of course, they might express sexuality different to yourself. They express gender different to yourself. But that doesn't really matter, does it, at the end of the day? What people do behind closed doors really shouldn't be a matter of discussion in how we validate them.
You know what I would suggest? I would suggest in their heart of hearts they don't really believe what they're saying.
Oh my God, you would suggest in the heart of hearts that they don't really believe what they say. So why would they go through all of this experience only to be holding up a facade? That doesn't make sense. Just because people are kinky, that doesn't indicate deceit. God, like everyone has their kink. Cue Family Guy's kink song.
You've got a kink. You've got a kink. Don't be afraid to put a finger in the...
They haven't even named this baby yet. They were only together for a few weeks before she became
They're not saying if
pregnant.
it's a boy or a girl, are they?
No, I don't
you know they
think
don't.
so. I think they just call the baby the snail all the time.
Okay, so I could think like that is odd. I find it odd in myself that you're going to leave your baby gender neutral, but there's nothing inherently bad about it. As long as the child is raised to feel comfortable expressing some form of gender, then kids don't even have genders anyway, as much as we assign them to them. You were not a kid that thought, oh, I'm this form of kid and I have to behave this way. You just do what makes you happy. Whether or not leaving their child gender neutral makes the parents happy, it probably has very little effect on the child, but that is just my opinion, nothing more.
Neither Fernando nor Diane has had gender reassignment surgery, but everybody keeps saying gender has nothing to do with physical. And if that's the case, how can you have a gender reassignment surgery then?
God, I'm gonna give this guy props for his, like, fucking gender knowledge, whatever you want to call it. Like, it's stupid that is even a branch of knowledge, but let's keep going. He was correct in differentiating between a gender swap or a gender surgery, whatever they were defining, and a sex change. They are two different things. They are still expressing their gender, but they haven't had a sex change. There are thousands of reasons why a trans person might choose not to have the operations, a few of which is the risk to your life. So, someone's operations or intent to have operations shouldn't define how we view them. To be honest, in my own opinion, what a person has between their legs we shouldn't use to define how we view them. We should define via the content of their character and how we view and feel them to be.
We got to put our thinkers on this stuff. This stuff is illogical.
So because there was a language in continuity, that means that gender expression is invalidated because it's illogical. I would argue that it means some people used the wrong terminology.
And we've had articles before talking about how they're trying to teach this to kids. I mean, can you imagine how confusing this would be?
Isn't that the whole point of education? To teach things that would be otherwise confusing?
Well, you can be whatever gender you want. You choose. Wow.
So you've essentially used this article of a trans couple having a child to just discuss trans people in general at large. There is a time and a place to have a discussion about whether we think children are mature enough to be educated about gender expression at a young age. But right here, right now, whilst you've already cited an article that has nothing related to that topic, I don't believe is the time to do so.
It's purely arbitrary. God says there's two.
I agree with him. It is essentially arbitrary. But that doesn't then mean God said man and woman, therefore only man and woman. Non-gender conforming people, let's use that term because trans and transsexualism is relatively modern. Non-gender conforming people have existed since ancient China and have been documented since ancient China. So the Bible says, there's only man and women, but history also states that non-gender conforming people have existed with us for a long time.
And in a sin-cursed world, there's going to be people who struggle with this issue of gender and stuff, and they deserve obviously compassion and love, but also the truth, which comes from God's word and not from our culture.
I like to hold myself to a standard of not just doing or believing something because the Bible said it. I find it intellectually dishonest. But first you have to prove that the truth comes from the Bible and the Bible comes from God before we can even entertain your bullshit.
Somebody said on here, I tried to identify as a 55-plus-year-old at Denny's last night, and they told me I can't do that.
Good try.
You're creating a straw man argument here. We could have a discussion about how valid certain expressions of gender identity is, or the nuance around discussing gender identity, but you lose the argument when you conflate gender identity to picking and choosing your age, or to picking and choosing what household appliance you are going to be.
Someone actually had given me this over Christmas break, sadly, and said, just wanted me to take a look at it. And it's called the Genderbread person, not gingerbread, but Genderbread. And basically it's trying to go through all these different aspects of gender. So you have gender identity, gender expression, biological sex, and then who you're attracted to sexually and romantically, and trying to show the spectrum, so to speak, that there is. And it blows me away, especially when it comes to biological sex. There isn't a spectrum.
Okay, well, you are the geneticist, so I would like to speak to you in completely technical terms. Yes, there actually is a spectrum of sex, but it can come down to terminology. You could say that those variants are nothing more than variants and should not be accounted for when we discuss gender. But regardless of semantic discussions, gender is not as simple as XY or XX chromosomes. There are lots and lots of different variations on those that result in different conditions and sometimes don't result in any condition. Therefore, there is a spectrum of different opportunities that could arise from just your chromosomal pairing.
Now there are rare cases where there is ambiguity because of developmental or genetic problems, and those are sad situations.
Sad.
We're not discounting
very
that.
Rare.
They are very rare, and so are trans people very rare. So rarity doesn't exactly argue against something, it just points out the likelihood you are to come across said thing.
But there is no spectrum other than that. You're either male or you're female. That's it.
Bitch, you just contradicted yourself. You said there's no spectrum with the caveat of other than that. And then you said you are either male or female. Well, no, there are genetic abnormalities which result in people that have different chromosomes, which wouldn't count as being specifically male or female. So they are incorrect in their assertion that sex is less binary than people assume. The majority of people do fall into the binary sex categories, but that does not mean that there isn't a grey area surrounding them, and that grey area is just another word for spectrum.
Let's say a person is born male. How do they actually know the mind of a female to say that they identify as female?
Whoever that dude is raised a honestly, amazingly interesting question. I also find it curious as to why trans people can say they feel like a different gender, because how do you know what it feels like to be a different gender? For example, I feel like a woman, but I don't think I feel like other women. I feel like I have the gender expression of a woman because of how society defines how the different roles are supposed to behave. But in my mind, I don't think I feel like that next woman next to me or the woman over the street, because every individual woman feels individual. They do not feel like every other woman. Yeah, we have similarities, but that doesn't make it enough to say, oh, I feel like women. Even biological women amongst themselves don't feel the same. So I agree with him on that point. I find it quite interesting where these discussions go. But I think we need to separate moderate, liberal trans people from extremist versions of us that use mispronouncing pronouns as an act of violence. Those are not representative of the trans community.
It's like we said, on Facebook, people have 35 different types of definition of, or 50 different,
over 50,
different ideas about gender and so forth.
See, here's my point on the whole, oh my God, Facebook have too many genders. Jesus, help me. Is it weird? Yes. My gender is still just female on my Facebook because I'm not any more abstract gender expression. But my question is, what are the real world applications? You putting extra genders and making room for non-gender conforming people on your platform, that will benefit them to a certain degree, and we can have a discussion as to why that should even benefit them. How does it negatively affect you, on the other hand? I find a lot of these discussions have no real negative implication other than, I don't understand it, so meh.
Gender is not an experience. Gender is a fact. And so that's, that's the problem with it.
But yeah, I feel like there are so many valid questions to be asked about the trans community and the trans experience, and how these two communities, the heterosexual cis-normative community and the trans community, interact, and how we can accommodate both communities with each other. Some of those questions were asked in this video, but they were not addressed and they were not talked about in an adequate fashion.
The Answers news team isn't big on comprehensive discussions. It's more of a platform to advertise books.
So, yeah, bang, bang, wham, bam. Thank you, ma'am. And thank you to Paulogia for having me on his show. I appreciate you having a scrub, no subscribe to be like me on your channel. It means a lot. And hopefully I will see some of you on mine.
Absolutely. If you haven't already, check out the smart, sarcastic, British stylings of Anti-Ordinary. I'll put a link to her channel in the description. Thanks for watching. If you're new to Paulogia, please take a second to subscribe so that you can be notified when new science videos and Ham and Egg news episodes are released.
And my homies agree, I really look good in black, fool.
Huge thank you, as always, to my Patreon patrons who help make this channel possible. If you're willing and able to support financially, please check out patreon.com/Paulogia for details and rewards. Until next time, later.
Bye.